In our line of work, unfortunately, we do see evil acts on a routine basis. This callousness shown in this situation towards this child is horrendous and truly evil.
A young boy with autism was reported to be kidnapped. He hadn't been seen for weeks. Then remains were found. Was this a horrible accident or cold-blooded murder? Well, 2 are in custody, including the young boy's own mother. Thanks for joining us on Law and Crime. I'm Elizabeth Millner. Hershall Creachbaum was a 7-year-old elementary school student from Ohio. But now, instead of going to school, balloons, stuffed animals, and flowers lay in honor of his memory. And the way police describe what happened to him, let's just say no one, especially a child, should have to go through it.
On Saturday, July 12th, about 3:45 in the morning, we got a call from 404 Xenia. The initial call was for a report of a kidnapped child. So multiple crews searched the area as this information, we received this information. As the investigation unfolded, it was determined that Hershall had not been seen for several weeks. At that point, the investigation turned into a potential homicide investigation. Ultimately, it was determined that Hershall was not missing, but was deceased for several weeks.
That was the Dayton police chief describing to a room full of reporters what happened to 7-year-old Hershall.
Information was then developed that led our investigators to the area of McClure and US 35. The slide shows you both locations, the US 35 McClure location and also the 404 Xenia. To this location, and we recovered what we believe is Hershall's remains at this point.
But let's take a moment here to talk about Hershall. Hershall was nonverbal, he had autism, and used a wheelchair. So when 911 dispatch got a call on Saturday about a boy being kidnapped, you can imagine the response.
We also are very appreciative of several police department and some other resources. Amesbury PD, Springfield PD provided assistance. Buckeye Search and Rescue, they provided cadaver dogs as we were looking for Hershall's remains. And also several of community members came out to help in the search, including some family members of Hershall.
But what was revealed in that 911 call? Well, we learned it was Michael Kendrick who placed the 911 call. Michael is the boyfriend of Hershall's mom, Ashley Johnson. Michael reported to dispatch a man punched him and took off with Hershall. So search crews arrived to look for him. According to a report by the Dayton Daily News, the dispatch log was updated afterward to reflect there was no indication Hershall was taken, but that he was missing instead. But that wasn't the full story either. Both Michael and Ashley were taken in for questioning, and Ashley came clean first. She allegedly admitted to police her son was dead, but his death wasn't recent. She allegedly told police Hershall died sometime in late May when she was in the hospital having surgery. And while in surgery, someone else was supposed to be caring for him. That person was her boyfriend, Michael. She claimed she never saw her son again after she returned from the hospital, because by that time, her boyfriend disposed of her young son's body by railroad tracks. The Dayton Daily News reports Ashley told police Michael told her that her son died from natural causes. But what did Michael have to say about what happened to Hershall? He allegedly told police he was drinking, and in an argument over the phone, he punched Hershall in the head twice. Again, think about that for a second. I'm sure we all can agree, no matter how mad we get, no child should ever be punched in the head. After the 2 blows, Michael allegedly told police he then pushed Hershall down, causing him to bounce off the floor and striking other parts of his body. Now remember, Hershall is nonverbal. He was also in a wheelchair, and to think those were his final moments are horrible. Michael allegedly told police Hershall died the next day after that incident. But he didn't call EMS or police then. Instead, he reportedly kept Hershall's lifeless body in the home, only allegedly removing him once an odor began. Again, he didn't call police then either. Instead, he moved Hershall's body into a freezer, and from there used a suitcase to dispose of the little boy's body onto a grassy field. Again, this was allegedly weeks before Michael called 911, because weeks later, Michael allegedly went back to the spot where he dumped Hershall's body and recovered his bones and left them in a bag. So during his police interview, he was able to tell investigators exactly where Hershall's remains were. Police booked Michael and Hershall's mom, Ashley, a couple of days later, but neither were booked for murder.
He's currently in jail. Charges are tampering with evidence, 3 counts, abuse of a corpse. You also see his convictions, felony, his criminal record, which shows aggravated arson felony, theft felony, unauthorized use of a motor vehicle, misdemeanor, weapons under disability, aggravated trespass, also misdemeanor. And we also have Ashley Johnson, who's the biological mother of Hershall. She's been charged with obstruction of justice, which is a felony, and failure to report her death, which is a misdemeanor. And she has a prior criminal conviction of theft, which is a misdemeanor. It is important to note that these charges are preliminary charges against these two individuals. Our investigators are working with Montgomery County prosecutors, coroner's office, and additional charges may be forthcoming based on the forensic examination of what we believe are Hershall's remains.
I want to thank Odoo for sponsoring this story. Odoo is a powerful all-in-one business software that helps you manage everything from sales to accounting and, yes, manufacturing. Schedule your production, manage your assembly line, and fine-tune your work orders with Odoo all-in-one easy-to-use platform. Need fully assembled manufacturing software that'll put your business ahead of schedule? Well, Odoo has you covered. Plus, Odoo's manufacturing app syncs seamlessly with your sales, inventory, and purchasing modules, so everything stays connected and running smoothly. Check out Odoo to take your manufacturing process to the next level and get a free 15-day trial today at odoo.com/LCNewsManufacturing. The Dane police chief says it's unclear if more will be charged, but right now it's an ongoing investigation.
Can you talk about any of the items that were pulled from the home and evidence?
A lot of items were removed from the home. I can't get into details about the value of them because that's still an ongoing process as to what they reveal and the direction that we believe that what we have. But we need to make sure that the linkage is done by the folks who are going to do the analysis of that evidence.
So at this time, we can't say that there's a deep freezer that was pulled from the home?
I'm not going to get into any of the details, that kind of stuff. Obviously, some of that is publicly available. We're not going to make comments on that.
I'm joined now by former child abuse and sex crimes prosecutor Marian Bracha. Marian, thank you so much for joining me. It's always great to see you. You know, this case is really sickening, and now two people are in custody, including Hershall's own mom. What's your reaction to this case?
It's just heartbreaking, as is any case where you hear of a vulnerable member of our population being taken advantage of, being victimized or abused in any way. Anytime a child is hurt, it's a heartbreak, but especially one as vulnerable as Hershall was.
And Hershall's mom, Ashley, and her boyfriend, Michael, were both arrested, yet neither are charged with murder, pending a further investigation and what comes out of that. But are you expecting more charges to come against the two?
I wouldn't be surprised if they did, and I would applaud the Ohio authorities who are taking the time and the space they need to do a thorough investigation and to get the forensic evidence they need to establish cause and manner of death, so that if additional charges are warranted, they're well supported by the science and well supported by the physical evidence. So I think they're doing the right thing at this point.
And how important is an autopsy going to be as far as next step goes? Because it's hard to believe that anything that happened to Hershall was accidental or possibly natural, especially given that he was found not in his home. He was found out, I think, by some train tracks in a bushy area, in a suitcase of all places. What are your thoughts on just how important the autopsy will be, given that, you know, at first it was an accident, then it was something more serious? But what are your thoughts just about the autopsy altogether?
Right. Well, I think any of the stakeholders involved in this case, whether it be the prosecutors or the investigators, know that they need more than the words of Kendrick himself, more than just his version of what happened to Hershall. And so I think the autopsy, and again, establishing cause and manner of death, is going to be dispositive of whether or not assault charges or certainly a homicide charge of any gradation attaches. So the autopsy is, I think, going to be the crux of this investigation.
And according to reports, you know, Hershall's mom was saying that Hershall might have been dead since back in May. We're in July and his body was just found over the weekend. What are your thoughts on just this long time lapse that happened between him allegedly being dead and then, you know, his remains being found by authorities?
Well, it certainly doesn't bode well for the charge that Johnson is facing, in that her failure to report a death to authorities and her aiding the obstruction of justice. So that the longer the time lapse, the better the evidence is for the prosecution for those two charges. But also what that time lapse makes me think about is any hardship that the forensic examiners might face in establishing cause and manner of death because of, not to be graphic, but because of the decomposition of the body and the circumstances under which the body was found, that could affect the validity and the ultimate findings from the autopsy report.
And it's hard for me to believe that weeks and months at that point just went by and there didn't seem any type of concern from Hershall's mom, Ashley, like in the sense that, okay, something might have happened. Why not report it to police back then? I think she was saying that she was recovering from a surgery and Hershall was in the care of Michael Kendrick. But at the same time, you would think if you're not hearing from your son for weeks and you're not knowing what's happening to him, the first thing you would do is call authorities. But are you surprised that it just didn't seem that she cared enough in a way?
Unfortunately, I think that the defense in that regard is going to be, well, Hershall was nonverbal, and so it would likely not have been a surprise to the mother to not have heard from him. I don't get the impression that even if he were in someone else's care, under someone else's roof, that he would have been able to pick up the phone and have a check-in call with his mom, which of course just adds to the heartbreak in this case. But again, as you said, that time lapse between the possible death and when it was ultimately reported, I think just strengthens the prosecutor's case and begs the question that you asked. In all that time, you didn't even inquire, didn't even wonder about the well-being or the safety of your child.
And what do you make of this 911 call that Michael Kendrick made to dispatch where he was claiming that Hershall was kidnapped and missing, and then apparently he was drunk while he was making this phone call? What are your thoughts just about this, what feels like a possible cover-up that was going on? And this call happened pretty recently, especially given that the mom had told authorities that she believed he had died back in May, but this phone call was only made just last week.
So I think that is correlative evidence that the prosecutors could use to establish the tampering with evidence charge. The fact that Kendrick was telling a different story or trying to cover tracks or invent some other circumstances of the child's disappearance and unavailability. I think, however, Kendrick's defense team will want to draw attention to the fact that he was intoxicated, so that nothing that he reported should be considered reliable or should be the basis for prosecution. But I think you're right that all of those circumstances establish the totality and perhaps the consciousness of Kendrick's guilt, of his own guilt in wanting to distance himself from the cause of Hershall's death and the circumstances of where the body was eventually found.
And I was going to ask you that, like, do you think that this call was a consciousness of guilt call because he was drunk and maybe he was feeling bad about what happened allegedly, because we don't know the full extent of what may have happened, but in terms of just his consciousness of guilt, do you think that's why he made that call?
Perhaps. And I think that is something that the prosecutors could and would argue. It might have been, finally a discovery of conscience. The prosecutors might argue that as well. But again, the defense team would say he was intoxicated, didn't know what he was saying or doing, so none of that is reliable. So I would, again, harken back to the physical evidence and what that will show. And also there were conversations, right, between Kendrick and Johnson, wherein Kendrick relayed what he claimed happened to Hershall. And if the argument is that he was intoxicated at the time he made the 911 call, well, was he not intoxicated at the time he made those disclosures to Johnson? So that might be more reliable evidence to establish what did or did not happen to Hershall.
Yeah, and it seems like kind of drinking might be something that is kind of a theme throughout this, because he allegedly told police he was drinking and he punched Hershall in the head twice and pushed him down. And knowing that he's nonverbal, knowing that he has autism, and knowing that he's in a wheelchair and needs a caregiver, I mean, just thinking about what this 7-year-old boy went through and what might have been his final moments, or even just in general what he went through. I mean, I just can't even fathom doing that to a child, another person, anything like that. What are your thoughts?
The same as yours, really. It's just an awful way to treat any human being, but especially a nonverbal child confined to a wheelchair. You just can't imagine a life ending like that.
And, when things like this happen, I know a lot of people want justice just right away, right? They want the murder charges, they want the homicide charges. Obviously, this is just alleged. We're still in the early stages of the investigation from what we learned from police. But why is there kind of this pause in just charging possibly homicide and then just upgrading the charges from there? What's kind of the decision behind that?
Well, again, for the homicide charge, you need to establish the cause of death. And so right now, you have the only the words of Michael Kendrick saying that he inflicted these punches and that the child fell to the ground. Now, the prosecution can't proceed on a homicide charge with just the admission of the would-be defendant, of Kendrick. It's a concept in the law called corpus delicti. You need to establish the body of a crime or harm before you can use the words of the alleged perpetrator. So even if Kendrick says, this is what I did and this is what caused the death, the prosecution should have independent evidence of, again, manner and cause of death in order to substantiate a homicide charge if that were to be added to the complaint later.
And this case overall rightfully brings out a lot of emotions from people, especially people in the community who might have known Hershall, other family members who have known Hershall, who loved Hershall, and just recognizing everything that he might have gone through in those final moments, just horrible altogether. But I'm curious to know, what is it like prosecuting a case like this, especially when emotions are high, especially when you have a young victim who is vulnerable? What's it like prosecuting a case like this?
Well, remember, the duty of the prosecutor is to seek justice. There is no requirement of the prosecutor to secure a guilty verdict or a conviction in every case. There's no duty of the prosecutor to secure a term of imprisonment or a jail sentence in every case. The prosecutor is there to make sure that the interests of every person in that courtroom is represented, even including the defendant, making sure that the defendant has a fair trial, making sure that the defendant's constitutional rights are protected and safeguarded throughout the proceedings. So prosecutors do have a very, very special duty to protect the safety of the community and to seek justice on behalf of the victims who can't speak for themselves, but they also have a duty to set aside whatever emotional or visceral response they or we as a community may have to allegations and make sure that justice is delivered fairly, evenly, and without passion or prejudice.
And do you see, again, everything's very preliminary right now, early stages of this investigation and what may come out of that. But in terms of just, do you see a possibility, I should ask, whether or not there might not be murder charges, possibly for the mom, or possibly that this might have been an accident? I don't see that actually happening, but in terms of your thoughts, I'm curious to know, is it possible, in the realm of possibilities, that murder might not be a charge that's later added?
Well, I think that again, the forensic investigation is going to be dispositive of that. So if there is no cause of death that can be established from the forensic investigation, if there is no link that can be made between the so-called caregiving or alleged caregiving that Kendrick was offering to Hershall and Hershall's eventual death or cause of death, there might be a lacking connection there or a lacking link to bring that additional charge. But again, I think that we'd have to wait and see what investigators reveal, what the physical examination of the remains reveal, and eventually whether that homicide charge is sustainable.
Given the state of the body, given that Hershall was reported missing and he might have been dead for weeks, I think it's kind of leaning a little bit more towards murder and, upgraded charges later on, especially with police saying that it's a homicide investigation. Marian Bracha, I want to thank you so much for your time and your insight into this case. Before we sign you off, though, where do you think everything goes from here?
Again, I think we wait for the results of physical and laboratory testing. I think we see what that reveals in terms of cause of death, and then take it from there. And I would anticipate that now that both defendants are represented, perhaps the investigators attempt some further statements with them, of course, with counsel present. But really, I think that the autopsy will determine where this case goes.
And we'll just wait to see what the autopsy report reveals when it's later released. Again, Marian, I want to thank you so much for your time and your insight into this case. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
The Dayton police chief said during the press conference another child was living in the home. That child is now in the custody of Child and Family Services. Online records as of this recording show Michael Kendrick is still in the Montgomery County Jail, held on no bond. Ashley Johnson is also still in custody. Her next court date is July 16th. We'll continue to keep an eye on this story for any new updates, but thank you so much for watching us here on Law and Crime. I'm Elizabeth Millner.